selected was Budd Boetticher, who had made a remarkable series of pictures, many of which you're going to see starting with the next show tonight, Ride Lonesome, the Randolph Scott Westerns, which constitute a specific period in film history that is endlessly rich. So we came to L.A. and we looked up Budd and found him, and he was willing to talk to us. And we walked in and we said, with some grand sort of theory, "Now, Mr. Boetticher, all your pictures seem to be about moral confrontations between good and evil and somebody in the middle. And Mr. Boetticher, it seems that the person in the middle who doesn't make the choice usually gets killed." And Budd looked at us and said, "Of course." And that was the beginning of what I'm very proud to say is a friendship since those years. So it's my great honor to present Mr. Budd Boetticher.
Emotional for me to, I don't need that, to be here tonight with an audience like this after all these years, to come back, especially here. And I'm so happy you came. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, great. This is the beginning of our 3-day tribute to Budd's work, and we're going to show many rare pictures and new prints of a number of films, as you may have heard from Dennis earlier. This is a treat for us. Some of the pictures are available on television, but there is a power to them on the screen that is unmatched. Now, the first question that we're all dying to match is, good God, how did Robert Stack get up there and do that? Is this something he knew how to do or did for you? Or yeah.
Well, I asked specifically to be able to introduce a dear, dear friend of mine. I didn't want Eric to do it. Bob Stack and I were riding down a road in the mountains one day about 3 weeks before the picture started, and we were sitting in the back seat of a limousine. And we were on the way to Carlos Aruz's ranch for Bob to train. And we heard blam, blam. And Bob looked down in the valley and he said, "Damn, I missed that." And I said, "Miss what?" And he said, "Somebody down there shooting skeet." And I said, "So?" He said, "Well, I miss it." I said, "You do it?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "Are you any good?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, "How good are you?" And he said, "Well, I'm the world's champion." And that's what it was all the way through the picture. Everything I asked him to do, of course, immediately that went right into the show. When you've got an actor who can do something, you let him do it, and it makes the picture look authentic. And Bob was like that all the way through the show. Now, I've worked with them all, except some of the new ones today, the new heroes. But I've never met any actor in my life that was as brave as Matador de Toros Robert Stack. Where is Robert?
Can you come up and join us?
Actually, we're running these pictures, not for me, but so I get to see my pals again. You look great.
Yeah, that's because I got a young wife and I got to keep moving. Yeah, you know, the thing about this director of ours, people forget that he was, honest to God, a bullfighter. He had his alternativa. Armita gave you that, didn't he? So he was a bullfighter. So I found myself involved in my youth with stuntmen and crazy people racing cars, boats, and things. So I found him my kind of guy. And he said, "Now look, I'll never ask you to do anything I wouldn't do." So when I got in the ring, and the first time one of these silly animals came after me, I thought to myself, what the hell am I doing here? This guy's a professional bullfighter. But I tell you something, these guys, all the bullfighters, everybody in Mexico, this was no gringo making a movie. These were guys who, well, I know one fellow had his head almost torn off, Felix Briones, and he was crying one day, and blood was running down his face, and I said, "You'll be all right." He says, No, it's not this. I don't want to bring dishonor to Mexico. I want to make a great picture for Budd. And that's the way they all were. So, you know, I think he did.
Now, in fact, is this something you had ever learned or tried to do, or did you learn it off of the picture?
No, it was Budd was very subtle. He and Duke, I don't know whether Duke was the guy that instigated the whole thing, where there used to be a premise in the old days where you didn't act something, you were. So to find out if I had any guts or not, very subtly I was invited to go to a small town called Pastaje or so. Oh, no, it wasn't. It was some strange little town, you remember. To a tienta. Now, tienta is where they have the animals and they run them to see how brave they are. And the dumbbells get out there and sort of fool around with a cape. And Duke and I'm sure, quite sure, Budd also said, "Oh, why don't you give it a shot?" Now, I know that if I had run, that would have been the end of the whole thing right there. I stayed there and got knocked down a few times, and so I got the movie. You know,
the great day was in Plaza Mexico, and Bob is too damn brave. And especially when I was there, he wanted to show me that one day he figured he could do it better than I did. So I asked Bob when we were getting this last sequence, I said, "Bob, stand out in the ring with the muleta and make the pass of death, but you don't have to do it. The minute the bull moves, back up and get out of the way, and we'll protect you." And the fence was, far enough away so that it wasn't in the shot. So Mr. Guts gets out there in the ring, and 52,000 crazy Mexicans all loving him. And we had every bullfighter in Mexico in the pictures you saw. And he stood there, and this big bull was 10 yards away, and I said, "Call to him." And Bob said, "Hey, hey." And I said, "Come on, Robert, you can do it." And you could see the adrenaline going, and he said, "Hey, hey." And the bull looked at him, and I said, "Louder, Bob." And the bull went, "Aah!" And Bob turned to me and he said, "Jesus, you didn't tell me they honked." And he would have stayed there forever. Maybe not.
No, I don't think so.
And what about Gilbert Roland? Did he know how to do this as well?
You don't want to talk to me about Gilbert Roland.
Oh, come on, be.
No, he didn't do anything.
His father was a bullfighter. I'm going to interview you now. Very good fighter. Somebody say something.
Well, he looked great in the picture. Yeah.
He was wonderful in the movie. Yeah, of course. And he was the only one who wasn't sick. He wouldn't eat anything he couldn't peel or cut in half or something. Everybody else had diarrhea 22 times.
If I made a picture about Hitler, Bob would sit here and tell us all he was really a great guy.
I hated his mustache, that's all.
We'll move on to another topic, Bud. Now, Bud, you made, in addition to this picture, you made Magnificent Matador, and then you made the Carlos Aruza story. How did you first become fascinated with bullfighting?
Well, that's a long story, and I'm not going to bore you with it. You've got to put up with me for 2 more nights. But it's in the book, and they asked me to send some books here, and I've never plugged anything before, but when you make a picture that's good, you're proud. And when you write a book that you really like, you trust me, it's pretty good. It's all in there. You can't tell this in one fell swoop.
Are you talking about When in Disgrace?
Yeah.
Yeah, Bud has written Autobiography, which is a remarkable work called When in Disgrace, which traces the history of the making of the Carlos Aruza story and a number of other elements of his career. Bob, now, when you were asked to shoot the skeet, had you ever done that in film before?
No, I as a matter of fact, when I first began shooting, my dad died when I was 9, and my mother was afraid to bring me up in a house full of ladies, so she had my grandfather take me out to a place called a skeet field, and in those days, that was Hollywood's game, believe it or not. I mean, now people are afraid to take a gun, you're some kind of a dirty rat, but then Gable and Cooper, Hemingway, Howard Hughes, everybody was out there, and they all had a lot of fun. Carol Lombard, Gary Cooper's wife, held a long-run record, and it was kind of Hollywood's game, and I learned very quickly, and I didn't have too many brains, but I had good reactions, and I became All-American. I was 16 and held 2 world records by the time I was 17, and they put me in the Hall of Fame in 71, all of which doesn't take any brains, but a certain measure of kind of quick reactions. And I was a much better shot than ever was an actor, but that's why it was interesting. The thing about Bud is that he would take a situation that came up at the moment, which wasn't even in the script, and pull it into the show. I remember the stuff at the Plaza Mexico. Remember when it began to rain?
Yeah.
And all of a sudden we had this wonderful. Was it Jack Draper? Was he the cinematographer? And how things happen, how man proposes, God disposes, and it started to rain. And this was after I had caused Roland's death, isn't that it? And I came back to the bull ring, And all of a sudden, like he had said, hey, God, give me the right mood, the rain started coming down, and all these bronze bullfight statues, the rain dripping off of them, and the whole thing, and there was a mood in that that, believe me, had not much to do with me, but had to do with the fact that you know the guy upstairs, and he works for you all the time.
Well, that was very interesting. We had two things like that. It started to rain, and I know Mexico, and we could either quit or get a case of tequila and finish the sequence, and it was just pouring, and Bob was out there for hours in the rain. And the other sequence, remember when the two of them are standing on the top of the corrals, and he says, so, you know, we always pray, and he turns to Bob and he says, you'll pray too. That really was thunder, and we left it in, and you want to say, hey, whoa, wait a minute. But these are the things. What hurt me about cutting the picture, and it's all back in now, and when you see grainy film, it's from Bob and from my 16-millimeter print, because Duke knows now none of this was done maliciously. My two pals, Jack Ford, who became a dear, dear friend of mine later, and never discussed cutting this, they thought it was a B picture, so they cut it to an hour and a half. And you'll love this, especially having read about Ford. He was very subtle. I couldn't get anybody to see the picture because I was up against a great director, Robert Rossen, who was making The Brave Bulls, and they had a lot of money, and we didn't have any money at all. And they had stars, one of mine, Tony Quinn, and I thought we were dead, and so did everybody else. So I couldn't get anybody to see the picture. And I had never met Mr. Ford. So I called him, and he got on the phone, and before I could try to introduce myself, I didn't have any credentials, but I thought maybe he knew I made a picture. He said, why the hell haven't you invited me to see your movie? You know how I love Mexico. So he said, set it up for me, and I'll get back to you at the end of the week. So I waited. I had no furniture in the living room, so I paced around in the empty living room to give me some exercise. And I waited Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday. And Friday afternoon, John Ford's secretary called and said, Mr. Ford is on the phone. So he got on the phone. He said, Bud, I saw your picture. I've never said this, never said it before, and I'll never say it again. I said, is it any good? And he said, nope, it's great. So I said, well, what are we going to do about it? He said, can you get on the lot? I said, I don't have a drive-in pass. He said, do you know where Herbert Yates parks his Rolls Royce? And I said, yes, sir. He said, pull in there and leave the keys. So I had an MG. So I went in to see him, and here's this great mentor of mine, and he said, I'm going to win you an Academy Award. You have one little problem. You've got 42 minutes of real crap in there. Well, the real crap was the association between Bob and Gilbert, which was great. Duke figured if two guys really loved each other, there was a problem. So there's a problem. He thought that I was too sentimental about the kids, so we got rid of the kids. Now, the only way you can make Gilbert Roland or anybody else under those circumstances look good is surround them with the greatest people in the world. And before you see them fight, so you have all the great ones light their cigarettes and pull out their chairs and bow like everybody does to an executive producer here before you know what they're going to say. And you say, wow, as great as they are, if he's better than they are, they're really something. You do the same thing with the rodeos, any stunt stuff. You surround them with the real thing. So he said, would you sign this paper here and I'll cut your picture? I was tickled to death. By this time I was so nervous I couldn't spell Boetticher, but I could spell Ford. So I signed this thing, and next I know the 42 minutes that I loved are out of the picture. And I couldn't believe that they had done this to me. So years went by, and I went from Oscar Boetticher Jr., because my father was still alive and he hated the business, so I really wanted him to see my name up there, to Budd Boetticher for the first time. And they found out I didn't like the picture. And the Directors Guild and the archives put it all back together. But what brought this long story out, they got the 16 millimeter from Bob. I couldn't even find mine. Now, Duke, in his gentle way, had said, I'm giving you each a 16 millimeter that you two love so much, and you could stick it up your, you know. So they got to work, not maliciously, but to help us. And there's a wonderful, wonderful expression in Spanish, no me ayudes, compadre, don't do me any favors, friend. So when somebody tells you they're going to win you an Academy Award, don't listen to them. So
Bud, when you were making the Arusa story, I know you had a lot of tactical situations. Could you discuss a little bit the actual strategy of how would one shoot so many? I mean, in those days, multiple cameras weren't as fashionable as they have become.
Well, we had 10 cameras on the Arusa picture, but really I should talk about Arusa when we run Arusa. You know, that's another situation. I will tell you one thing. I went to Mexico, and I spent 7 years there finishing this picture. And I had Carlos Arusa, the world's greatest matador, who later was on an equal with Manolete. And then when Manolete was killed in 1947, Arusa was the number one. And he was my dear, dear friend. But I was the director, and I've always been the director. And Arusa hated it, because here I had the greatest prima donna in the world, the best bullfighter in the world. And he would say to me, and I can't clean this up, it isn't that funny if I don't tell you the truth. He'd say, God, Bud, you tell me to stand here, you tell me to move there, you tell me to do this, you tell me to do that. Now, what would you like me to do with your goddamn cameras before the bull sticks his horn up my ass? So I would say, Carlos, what I do, I've been doing a long, long time, and you're the best at what you do in the whole world. But long after you and I are both dead, because of what we're doing with the picture, the world will remember Carlos Arusa. So the end of this is very simple, and you'll appreciate it. A young man in Mexico City, the first time I ever showed this picture, is a gigantic theater at the University of Mexico. And he got up and he said, Mr. Boetticher, and when they pronounce Boetticher right, the way it's spelled, you know they've done their homework, so I had a pal here. And he said, how could a man with your prestige lose his wife, lose all of his money, darn near lose his life, and certainly ruin his future and his career to film the story of a friend? And I never thought of an ad-lib like this in my life. And I think of it, I said, how the hell did you think of that? And I said, young man, wouldn't it have been a wonderful thing if the director of The Agony of the Ecstasy had had Michelangelo instead of Charlton Heston?
Bob, in the picture, you were asked to play what could have been a somewhat thankless part. I mean, you'd actually caused the murder, the death of your best friend, or the man who'd go to be your best friend, somewhat on a lark. And yet you had to convey that you got quite serious indeed and had the magnitude to win over the crowd ultimately. Now, do you recall how you and Bud approached this and made it at all realistic?
Well, I think structurally, bringing it up to date, a picture was made called The Untouchables. You may have heard of that. And structurally, it's very much like our show, because it's not at all the way Eliot Ness lived or the way the book was. But it takes a guy, a young guy, and brings in Sean Connery, who didn't exist, of course, in the original Untouchables, who teaches this young kind of callow fellow how to be a real street cop, and somehow in the process gets himself killed. And then Kevin Costner goes out there and revenges the death of Sean Connery. In a sense, this is true here, too. He causes the death of the person who's taught him, who he respects most of all in the world, Manolo Estrada. And the catharsis that comes, he gave me a little piece of business, Bud, before I went out there, and I was scared to death because this was a real bullfight crowd. These guys were not extras, believe me, and they came to see something. And Briones, Luis, who doubled me, I remember after the fight, after the corrida, Esto had in the headlines, bullfighting comes back to Mexico, because Bud had gone out there, I'm jumping around, Bud had gone out there, chosen the bulls. They were the biggest bulls they'd seen in the Plaza Mexico in years, because, you know, the toreros don't want to get hurt, so they breathe them down to make them less dangerous. But the answer to your question is that I think it's almost mystical when you get involved with this and the whole mystique of bullfighting and the embrazos that go with it, the risks, the death, the religious connotations. When you step into it, it transcends just plain life and death. It's a glorification of something that is so ancient and so strange that it's difficult for me to explain exactly what it is. But when I got out there in that Plaza Mexico, and I heard La Virgen de la Macarena, and I was about to go out there, baby, and there was a cuadrilla in front of me, and And he gave me a piece of business. He said, I got an idea for you. He says, look at that, look up, close your eyes, and walk. Well, what it gave the feeling about, holy Christ, I'm going to get killed, but here I go anyway, you know. And it was done on principle, which is amazing again. I think there was an honor to this man, but he was going to go out there, even if he got killed, and justify his belief and his traditional respect for the person who taught him how to fight. So anyway, beyond that, I was emotionally involved. Maybe it didn't show on film, but I had a hell of a time doing it.
It showed on film, and everybody loved Bob Roberto in Mexico. But I'll tell you a funny story. There were two actors. Robert was one of them, both good horsemen. And Bob knew where we were going. The other actor didn't. And we got on horseback, and we rode out into the fields, and Bob had his camera. And we came to the gate of this gigantic section where there was a semental, a stud bull, waiting to get in the movies. And we walked in, and the grass was very high. And we walked in and looked around, and the other actor wasn't in sight. So Bob and I rode in, and Robert's a great horseman, and I grew up on horses, and rode in, and we're in this field of death, but we can't see the bull. And the bull's lying down somewhere. And Bobby said to me, I don't mind this at all, but how do you know when we get close? I said, you'll know, just sit on your horse. When you feel the vibrator going, the bull's around here someplace. And all of a sudden, this massive bull stood up above the high grass, and Bob had his camera, and he said, what do I do? I said, Bob, take it now, because when he gets the rear end and he's looking straight at us, we got to get out of here. We walked in my tack room, our tack room, my wife in Ramona, where we have our stables, and the first thing he said was, I took that picture. I said, you sure as hell did.
And he kept getting closer and closer. Now, I knew the reason he was doing this, being a little bit crazy and quite wild and being a stuntman, Mr. Boetticher, and the numbers on the bulls, you can see them, you know. And we kept going closer and closer, and I kept thinking, how close is he going to get to? We get behind these damn things? And it was a very exciting experience, which had nothing to do with picking the bulls. You just had to see who was going to run first. It's called chicken, I think, isn't it?
Well, my point is that Bob was so great as he became really Mexican, and he became a torero at the end of the picture, and it shows on the screen. And I will tell you, to show you how we feel, and everybody feels, because you always think bullfighters are so brave. Again, of course, you've heard worse than this on television at 10 o'clock in the morning. But I'll tell you a naughty story, but it shows the attitude of the Mexicans. Macarena, that goes boom, boom, da-da-da-dum, boom, boom, boom. They play that 5 minutes before the bullfight starts. And when they play that, you have to put out your cigarettes if you're smoking. And you have to put your cape on, and it isn't going to rain, and nobody's going to get you out of this. In 5 minutes, the bullfight parade is going to start. And all the bullfighters, when I was learning, would teach me. I was the only American in Mexico, and I had flaming red hair, and I was kind of a pet when I was 19 and 20. So they would ask me questions, and I would have to answer, like you would ask questions to a football player. What about this? What about that? And they were always very, very formal, important things for you to know. So Soldado, who had the wonderful crossed eyes and that great face up there, was the comic of the group. And all the great maestros would ask me these questions, and I would tell them the answers. Hell, I knew more about bullfighting than they did, technically, because I'd read everything and studied, and I had the best ones teaching me. So one day, when I was so terribly serious, Soldado said to me, Bud, why do bullfighters wear such tight sashes? And I thought, God, this must have something more to do with Catholicism. I'll think of the answer in a minute. So I stopped and I said, Luis, I don't know. He said, it keeps their balls out of their throat when they play Macarena. But that's how you really feel.
Yes, we're going to take one question, yeah.
I'm really curious about Joy Page. I fell in love with her when I first saw this film recently. And I'm curious about what became of her. And
well, Joy is a lovely, lovely lady, and I don't think she really wanted to be an actress. She's Jack Warner's stepdaughter. She was married to one of the best-looking guys you ever saw, Bill Orr, who was the head of television at Warner's and the Mavericks, if you see them. And she was a very happy lady, and this wasn't her cup of tea. Or she could have gone a long way. I think some of the close-ups of Joy are just remarkable, because we had such a sensitive group. I won't. Now I'm about to make 4 more pictures, and I hope we all get back together again. But I don't like to work with people I don't really love, I mean, really care about. And nearly everybody in the cast of Bullfight and the Lady, we really got along, and that's why I think the picture pays off.
I also think, Bud, that Jack didn't want her to be an actress,
I don't think so.
And I worked with her before that, and she's a lovely, lovely, delicate, beautiful actress, and I just plain don't think that he wanted his daughter to be an actress.
I would like to impose upon you they're gone. I was going to introduce my... Yeah, that's true. My next leading lady. I'm always excited about the people I work with, but we've just signed Assumpta Serna, the great Spanish actress, to play the Marquesilla. And she is dynamite. And I was going to introduce her, but unfortunately, they're leading. She called the other day, she just got in from Spain, and said, I'm having a very big problem working out my marriage between your pictures. So she came tonight. Now they're on the plane to get married tomorrow, and then she'll be back day after tomorrow for lunch. But I've had some great leading ladies in my day, but this lady is just spectacular.
Robert Stack and Budd Boetticher, we have to take a break now. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Boetticher.
Oh, Mr. Stack, we see you show all the time.
I know,
Very good.
Budd will be with us. Budd will be with us throughout the weekend, and will participate in a number of discussions. Tonight, he'd just like to make a few statements, and then we'll see you all tomorrow.
Now that Bob Stack and I don't have to sit up here and tell each other how great we are, we ought to get down to brass tacks. My fun, and thank you for staying, is answering questions. And I think you'll know by now that you get very straight answers. So let's do that instead of all this other stuff.
We'll take a few, yes. Question about 7 Men From Now, the first picture in the series.
7 Men From Now, I think, is the best Western that Burt Kennedy and I ever made. They wanted me to go to Europe and redistribute the picture there. Thanks to Michael Schlesinger, probably, with these new prints, we might do something about that. Columbia and I have always had a great love affair, and it might get better. What happened to 7 Men From Now is that it just plain disappeared into Michael Wayne's vault. And I saw Michael. If Duke were here, we'd have had all these pictures out. I don't know what's the matter with him. I've tried for 4 years to get the picture out. It's really a good Western. And at Burt Kennedy's birthday party last year, I corralled Mike in front of the pool, and he couldn't go to the right or couldn't go to the left. And promised me that call him Monday and he would take care of it and we'd get 7 Men From Now on. I called him Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday and Thursday and gave up. But it's really wonderful to have something to do in your mind, because the next time I get Michael Wayne in front of the pool, I'm going to push. But that's what happened to 7 Men From Now.
There is some hope. We're still working on it. Another question. Yes.
Well, you know, we were honored 3 times in the last couple of years where we heard from Turner that they were running 6 of them, one right after the other, all one Saturday. And I got calls from everybody. I said, I'm not going to see them. I made them. I don't want to see them like this. But there is a big difference. I just came back from Dallas, and I'm beginning to see these pictures again for the first time. And it's kind of wonderful. It's not ego, but when you can sit there and say, damn, that's good, you know, instead of saying, oh, I wish I'd done this, I wish I'd done that. But we had such a great group. I'll tell you a lovely quick story. Randy Scott and Bert and I were having dinner, as we always did in Lone Pine, about the middle of the picture. And Randy said, Bud, Bert, what's that nice-looking skinny boy in the red underwear I played that scene with this afternoon? And I said, his name's Coburn, James Coburn. He said, I like him. Let's write him some more lyrics. So that scene that I love, when he said, well, I didn't know that. Bert and I sat up all night, and we wrote that scene. And it knocked me out because he's so wonderful. Now, Jim is one of my leading men in the next picture, and he looks just great. But I'm getting the group back together. Bob Mitchell will be in Barnum. But that was the way Randy was. Most actors, when they think a young man is coming on big, they get rid of him on the cutting room floor. But Randy, we made a new star every picture that I made with Randy. And look at them, Lee Marvin, Purnell, Jim, Craig Stevens,
Boone.
Richard Boone. And, you know, they were all great. And Randy would say, oh, that was just wonderful. He really upstaged me. That boy really got something going for it. Of course, Randy had a little advantage. He was the richest guy in Hollywood. You hear about Hope and Crosby and all these fellas. One day he was sitting in his wheelchair, in his rocking chair, which he didn't need, but he carried it with him, reading the Wall Street Journal. On Sunday morning, I was going out to ride one of my horses, and he said, Bud, I just had the most terrible news. And I thought immediately he had two great adopted children he adored, and I thought something had happened to them. I said, what happened, Randy? He said, 3 of my oil wells in Texas blew out. I said, how many came in? He said, 11. But damn it, he said, you shouldn't lose one with all the advantages we have today. So he didn't have a big financial problem. He could relax.
But how long did you shoot on these westerns?
18 days always.
18 days for these pictures. And where did you find these locations? Did you just
dinner? And when I say these things, believe me, this is not ego. These are just statements of fact. I had a wife once that didn't last very long, and she was a Phi Beta Kappa Summa Cum Laude, president of her senior class at the University of Washington, and very young, and dear, I wouldn't have married her. And she said to me, you never read. I've never seen you read. And I said, Margot, I've read everything. I read a lot when I was in jail in Mexico, from Shakespeare to the Bible to everything that's good. And I don't read, I live. And I don't want to read what somebody else wrote about their ideas, how things should be done. I've lived all that stuff, and I don't have to turn to a technical director and say, look, if a guy's got a gun in your ear, what do you do? Because I've been in that position. Or what happens if the horse goes down and goes all the way down the cliff? Or what if a bull has a currency and doesn't want to come out of where he'd like to be and you have to go in and get him? I know those things from living it, and I use them in a picture. And it looks like I've studied and studied and studied, and it doesn't work that way at all. You just do it your way. And if somebody says, gee, what if, if it's a better suggestion than what I have, I'll use it. But I really know what to do with pictures like this. For instance, one of the biggest mistakes that was ever made in the picture business, nobody could make a better Gigi than Vincent Minnelli, who was brilliant, but that's what he did. So they gave him the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, and everybody died in chartreuse. You know, a director should know what he's doing. Yes.
All throughout the weekend, all the feature films we saw, I never saw an outdoor scene shot on a soundstage. Now, I've seen it in plenty of other big screen westerns. If I had seen an outdoor scene in a soundstage in one year, what would that have meant? Lower budget?
No, it would have meant that it was raining like the devil outside, and they were, you know, they really had to do it. I've never done that. Why? You've got God made outside. Let's go get it. You know, we can't improve it. We all try to improve or save money, and it doesn't work that way. You should save money in knowing what you do. These pictures, every one of them we made in 18 days because we all knew what we were doing. And today, these pictures have 40, 50 day budgets, which is crazy. Also, When they wanted an hour and 24 minutes, we gave them an hour and 26 minutes. And I could go to Mexico and shoot another bullfight, and all they had to fool with was 2 minutes. They couldn't ruin the show that way. Today they have committees. What do you think we ought to do? Oh, I love today's sets. You go on a set today, I don't go very often, and the director says cut. And what do you think they do? They have a meeting. And everybody comes around the committee. They say, what do you think we ought to do? And the director says, yeah, I don't know. What do you think we ought to do? And somebody says, well, why don't we get a close-up of the leading lady? And somebody's voice says, my wife doesn't like the leading lady. It's absurd. You say, cut, print, over here, Lucian, 25 lens, get a 4-shot. And if Lucian says to me, that's a piece of crap, you have a meeting with him and see what he can do to improve it. But you know where you're going and what you've done, and you're prepared. And that's a violent answer, but it's what I really mean. It's just absurd, the money they waste.
Ooh, more questions. Here in the front. Yes, you.
Are there any landscapes and or actors that continue to fire your imagination in much the same way that evidently the Alabama Hills and Eastern Sierra and Randolph did?
It's hard to do. Of course, we're going to Spain. And wait till you see this picture, because it's going to be a Spanish picture with 3 American cowboys out of, fish out of water. It's not a Western at all. It's an adventure picture. And we have locations in Spain that are just sensational. And I have friends in Spain, and you'll love this because the Spanish culture is really something. Luis Miguel Dominguin was a great, great friend of mine, is a great, great friend of mine, and he is, if you ever had a word that you would say, this is Mr. Spain, he's Mr. Spain. He took over when Manolete was killed and after Aruza died, and he's a spectacular gentleman. Probably the most significant politician right under King Carlos, Juan Carlos, is a gentleman who's working with us, and he has a great name, Juan Alfonso de la Calle Borges. And in Spain that means Washington, Lincoln, Kennedy, it's unbelievable. So I want to use Luis Miguel Dominguin as he's in his 60s now, as Assumpta's father, because it's great dignity and will give the picture a lot of class. So I called the second most important man in Spain, who's a pal of ours and making all the arrangements. And I said, Juan Alfonso, when's the last time you saw Luis Miguel? He says, Bud, I've never had the pleasure of meeting him. So it took us 3 weeks to get Luis Miguel's private number, just a few weeks ago. And I wanted to call him. We know each other this well. He was living with a very, very famous actress. All of you know, and you can find out. I'm not going to mention her name, but she was a smash. And he ran away from her. And he came to live with me for 2 weeks and hide in the valley. And we would practice bullfighting and play golf, and he'd wear dark glasses because all the newspapers were looking for this crazy bullfighter. They didn't know who he really was, who had run away from one of our great leading ladies. So I said, Luis Miguel, how could you have run away from so-and-so? I mean, that's really dumb. He said, Bud, it's a wonderful thing to cut 2 ears in the tail on Sundays in the bull ring, but every hour, he said, it's even too much for me. So I know him that well. So we finally got his telephone number, and I thought, how will I explain that I'm coming over there to make a picture, and I want him to act in it? So they finally got him on the phone. Right away he answered it, really a private number that nobody could get. And I said, Luis Miguel, habla Budd Boetticher. Hola, Bud. He said, when are you coming? I hear you're going to make a picture here. So I'm sure he'll be in it. He knew more about it than I did.
On the subject of landscapes, it's a little-known fact that during Mr. Boetticher's well-known wild youth, he also spent several weeks at the Jeu de Paume in Paris studying the Impressionists and Impressionist painters. And I think it shows in the picture we just saw. One of your favorite words is spectacular, and I would have to say that Comanche Station is visually a spectacular film.
That's dirty pool. Now my reputation has gone right out the window because I'm an art enthusiast. But I fell in love with the Impressionists, Gauguin and Toulouse-Lautrec and Van Gogh and Matisse and Renoir. And every day after work in the Navy, I was at the White House with President Truman, and I had a real tough job. They wanted me there because I was a great director, they thought, and I got to photograph the Easter egg hunt. stuff like that. I would go to the museums and study the Impressionists. And I've never stolen from anybody, and I sure as hell have stolen from them, because if these fellows had had sound and cameras, imagine how they could have painted. And you look at some of my setups, and it's a Renoir, and I'm proud to say so. You know, if you're going to steal from the best.
Okay, I knew we had some more all the way in the back.
But he wouldn't say so.
FX, you had a question.
Yes.
I think that you've accomplished so much with so little dialogue. I mean, it was remarkable to me how little dialogue there really was in the film. And I was wondering, is that something that you did on the set, cutting away dialogue that's already written? Or?
No, we never cut, but let me explain something. All of you are asking really great questions, and they don't do that anymore. They don't know the questions. These people didn't talk like college graduates. They were hicks. And the wonderful thing was, what people don't realize, most of our Western heroes are from the South, and they lost the war. And I would be blowing up trains and robbing banks and doing those things to get back at the North. And they didn't say things any more than one sentence at a time. When they started these psychological Westerns, where the fellow wondered if his mother had really been a prostitute in Dubuque, and is that what his problem was? Well, they didn't know that. You know, they were simple guys. They had a wife they loved. The wife got shot. They went out to get the bad guys, and at the end of the picture, they get them. And they don't go into a thesis on psychology. This is the way they were, and we did it the way they were.
One of the things that the founder of the Cahiers de Cinema, Andre Bazin, said when he saw Seven Men from Now, the first of the Scott pictures, was after all these psychological westerns, all these sociological, political, symbolic westerns, finally a western that is where a gun is a gun, a rock is a rock, a horse is a horse. And that was the highest compliment he could pay.
I'll tell you a very funny story, though, that I'd forgotten about, but you're bringing up the past. I wanted to find out when I made my first Western, which was with my pal Audie Murphy, called The Cimarron Kid, and I was under contract to Universal. I just made Bullfighter and the Lady, and they were very proud of me there, and they were going to give me the reign of the whole studio. So I thought, gee, I better go out and learn about these Westerns. So I went to Coffeyville on the sly, as I did with the Hoods. And it was the Coffeyville raid, and I wanted to know where the Daltons really were, and was Billy the Kid really in on it, and where they rode in and where they rode out and what they did. And I went to the old folks' home, and there were about 10 old guys there, and they were wonderful. They were in their late 80s and 90s, and they remembered very well the Coffeyville raid, which is a lot of baloney. But they told me all these wonderful things, and they all agreed. So I got all this authenticity, and I went back to Universal. And I walked down the Universal Street, and nothing I'd heard fit. The drugstore was in the wrong place. The stable was in the wrong place. They couldn't get out that way. That was a hay. So I ad-libbed the whole damn thing. And the end of that year, I got a medal from Coffeyville, from the Chamber of Commerce, for being the only authentic director of Westerns in the history of this story. So you wonder if any of it's true.
There's somebody who's been, here.
Speaking of authenticity, this is a small point, but I'm really impressed by it. Whenever your riders end a long trail ride, the horses are always sweated up.
And when Randolph Scott gives away his Winchester at the beginning of this picture to get the hostage, Claude Akins has to throw him
get one back. You're darn right. Well, we remember those things.
Yeah, that's
yes. In what? I wasn't allowed to be in those days. I made 9 pictures at Universal in 2 years, big pictures. And I would get a script. You're supposed to have 12 weeks off. I would get a script on a Thursday and finish the picture on a Friday that I was shooting and start shooting the next picture the following Tuesday. It was just absurd. And I hated it. And I blew up a mountain to get out of the studio. Really. It's now a parking lot. Not a damn thing. The original title was The Captives. And to get The Captives, the studio was going to have to put up, I think, $150 to buy the title, and they wouldn't do it. Bert and I wondered for a whole year what it meant. We finally figured it out. Somebody in New York thought of this. It's a brilliant title. And it means the Tanvordi Ranch, where he didn't ride the bull. That certainly had a lot to do with the picture. The worst one, I made a picture I cared about because it really started Anthony Quinn's career as a leading man, not as a 2 Oscar awarded supporting actor. And it was called El Numero Uno, the number one. When a bullfighter really feels that he's the number one, and this is where all this stuff started, that every football player now runs and sticks his finger into the camera. But a bullfighter stands in front of the ring and he looks at the hostile crowd and he sticks up his finger and he says, "Yo, I'm the number one." So the title with Quinn was going to be the number one. So I walked into my producer's office, who promised me he would do nothing but put up the financing, and he was sitting there with his group. I've never been facetious before or since. And I walked in, and my dear friend Barnaby Conrad's book, Matador, was on his desk. And he said, "I wish I could steal your pal's title for the title of our picture." And I thought of the worst title I could think of in the whole world in 1 second. And I said, "Why don't you call it The Magnificent Matador?" He said, "Jesus, that's great." So you have to be really careful.
Whole deals have been made that way. Okay. We'll have to let this be the last one, I think. Dennis is sort of
it's very funny.
signaling to me.
I had made a picture called Red Ball Express, and I had a wonderful, wonderful special effects man named Herman Townsley. And Herman loved me. We had a great rapport. And Herman never drew a sober breath, and he would be up all night with the girls, and I don't know when he ever slept. But he was the best special effects man I ever knew. So I always want to do things. This isn't going to take that long, but it's worth it. So I got in a Sherman tank. I'd never been in one before. I was in the Navy, and Herman knew I was in the tank. And you're in a harness, and you're pretty safe in there. And Patton and I are coming over the hill, and the Germans are firing at us. And all of a sudden, this tank went, not a sound, upside down. Herman knew what tank I was in. It was his way to start the day. When he blew the trees up for the first time in Red Ball Express, they were launched. There wasn't one tree that was hit with a shell and fell like they really do in war. They looked like rockets. They all went straight up there, and everybody yelled timber, and we'd run like hell, and the whole tree would come down. Just to preface this. So I wanted to go to Brazil with my pal Glenn Ford, and the studio wouldn't let me go. I had 5 more years on a 7-year contract. So it came time at the end of Wings of the Hawk with Van Heflin and Julie Adams. They were to come running out of the mine that they were going to blow up, and they were going to get across the bridge, and here came 40 troops from the Mexican cavalry, and if they can get across and blow up the bridge before the cavalry gets there at the end of the picture. So it's really important. So Herman came over to me, and he said, "How much soup do you want in the mine?" And I'm cleaning this up, I'm sure you'll know. And I said, "Blow up the whole friggin' studio." So now this is very funny. I always have the plunger myself, so that if the director makes a mistake, they're not going to fire me. And stuff I do is pretty dangerous, and I never want a special effects man to make a horrible mistake. So Herman came over. I was sitting in a chair like this, whole cast. We were from here to the street, from the bridge, across this gully. And we had 4 cameras on it. And I waited, and Herman's there to load the wires. And I've got the plunger. And I said, "Okay." They said, "Speed, speed, speed, speed," and I yelled, "Action," and boy, here they came, and the doubles are crossing the bridge, and I said, "Load it, Herman," and I went, bloom, and we blew up the whole friggin' studio. It blew my chair over backwards. Everybody ran for cover. It happened to be in June, and it was hot. It blew the windows out, fortunately, against the Venetian blinds at the cafe, the studio restaurant, or everybody would have been killed. Now, the end of this is lovely. I decided I didn't want to make any more pictures at Universal. And I was very hot at Universal. I knew I thought was going to be a very difficult thing. I wanted to go to Brazil with my pal Glenn Ford. So I called Bill Getz, the president of the studio, who was my friend. And I said, Bill, I want to meet with all the executives tomorrow morning at 12 o'clock. And I was going to tell them. Well, I knew they were going to cry, but I was going to tell them I didn't want to come in there anymore. So I walked in. They were all there. Leo Spitz, Eddie Mull, Bill Getz, the whole bunch of executives, Jim Pratt. And I said, and I thought I did a good job. I said, gentlemen, I don't want to work at Universal anymore. And they all said, all right. And I said, I don't think I'm getting this across to you boys. I said, I don't want to make any more pictures here at all. When I leave the gate today, I'm going to go across at the bar and have a beer at Eddie Keene's, my prop man's bar, and then I'm going to go home and I'm never going to work on the Universal lot again. They said, look, what we want is best for you. I said, will we shake hands though there's no contracts? And they said, yes. We all shook hands. And they didn't seem too damn sad, So I went across and I immediately called MCA, my agency at the time, and I said, guess what? I can go to Brazil. And my agent said, how did you find out? We just got the telegram an hour ago they had fired me. So that's the end of my career at Universal.
This has been a historic occasion to have Mr. Boetticher back in Hollywood, and I just want to say you have made it a very warm and pleasurable occasion. Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Boetticher.
Thank all of you so much. Duke, who do you want? He says, let's use Randolph Scott. He's through. That's the truth. We said, okay. That's my boy. What else? Yes. It's three there.
Yes, let's start with
We'll
the
get
show
all
in the
three
middle.
of you.
Yeah. Yes.
Oh, I think how can you say underrated when you see these 6 pictures? He was great. But they had, for instance, we made 3 pictures together, and then he called me and he said, I really got a serious problem. I said, what is it? He said, I have a contract to make my last picture at Warner Brothers. Now, we'd made 7 Men From Now, Decision at Sundown, and The Tall Tea, which is a wonderful picture. And I said, don't you love the humility? But I like it a lot. So I said, Randy, you can't do that. It'll be the same old crap, the black uniform, and it won't be a Randolph Scott picture like we want to make because we knew we had more to do. So I went over to Warner's, and I talked to Henry Blanke, who was the top producer there. And I said, Henry, I want to do Westbound. He said, you read it? I said, yeah, I read it. That's why I want to do it more than ever, because you're really going to screw up my star. He said, we don't have that kind of money. I said, I'll do it for $2.40. Just let me direct the picture so we can get on with our act, the last 3. And we didn't save Westbound, but we didn't lose our star. And that's the only one I don't acknowledge. I said, Westbound, don't play that. But the other 6 are pretty good. But as we progressed and really had a team, we began to realize we had something special.
Yes, we have one here. Yes.
Your respect to John Wayne and Jimmy Stewart. My 2 top favorites were always Randolph Scott and Joel McRae.
Well, Joel was sensational. They're very much alike.
Yes, very much so, because they were straight up Western. That's what they played without any kind of gimmick.
Well,
You all 4 of them personally.
well, I did too, and Joel, when I was an assistant director with George Stevens, who really was my mentor, I was second assistant on The More the Merrier. Yeah, pretty good one. Thank you.
I think we had another one here. Yes.
No, Burt Kennedy. I'll tell you quickly about Burt Kennedy wrote the best Western scripts I've ever read in my life. Burt and I are together again. He's my producer. I'm executive producer, but On a Horse, Mr. Barnum. Brilliant writer and a damn good director. Duke brought 7 Men From Now to me. I was doing a picture called A Killer Is Loose, and he was doing one with Jack Ford across the street. And he said, read this thing, Bood, and see what you think. So I took it to lunch, and I had an hour, and I read 35 pages. And I gave him the first shot on my set, and I walked over to Mr. Ford's set, and he was sitting with Wayne and a young fellow. And I said, Duke, I want to do this picture. He said, well, Jesus, you didn't have time to read it. I said, all I have to do is read the 35 pages. This is the best thing I've ever. The hell with the rest of the pages. I'll ad-lib that. This is brilliant. And I said, incidentally, I'd like very much to meet whoever wrote this. And he said, Mr. Bert Kennedy, Mr. Budd Boetticher. And we met that way, and we've been together ever since. But he would just give me the script. The last line, we ad-libbed everything on the set sometime. When you see Buchanan, the last line in Buchanan, we ad-libbed on the set, and I think that's one of the funniest lines that we ever did. Because always, nobody thinks about this. The Indians are all dead, all around you. They were killed during the night. And in all my pictures, our pictures, if a girl says, you hear woo, and she turns to Randy and she says, Buchanan, are those coyotes? He says, no, ma'am, it's the Indians burying the dead, because they're going to start smelling by the time you play the love scene, so you got to get rid of them. So we use that gimmick for the end of Buchanan when you see it, and I think it's very funny.
But before we end off, would you say a word about your great cameraman, Lucien Ballard?
Lucien. Again, may I be a little crude, but this is one of the great Hollywood stories. And I'm the Virgin Mary compared to what you see on television and all the movies. I walked into my office. This is my favorite story about any cameraman, and this is why we really had a love affair. I just adored Lucien. I walked in my office one day, and I was going to make Magnificent Matador. And I wrote the script. I did fight bulls. I was the director. And it was about bullfighting. I mean, how close can you get to a picture? And Tony Quinn, my bosom pal, was going to do the lead. So I walked in. It was 3 weeks before I was to leave for Mexico. And sitting behind my desk was the producer, who told me he would never interfere with anything at all. It was all my show. And my assistant director was sitting in a chair next to him. And the best-looking man I had ever seen in my life was sitting in an easy chair over in a corner all by himself. And he looked, the first thing I thought is, I don't have a part for this guy. I don't know who the hell this is, but I've got to get him in the picture. So my producer, Eddie Alperson, got up and he said, Mr. Budd Boetticher, Mr. Lucien Ballard. And I said, Mr. Ballard, what a delight. I said, I think I've seen everything you photographed, but I must tell you, you are so wonderful what you've accomplished in your career. I thought you'd be 90 years old. And my idiot producer said, I'm so glad you two get along. This is your cameraman. Now, when a thing like this happens before a picture, you've got about 10 minutes to prove to everybody that what they heard about you is true. So the stuff hit the fan. I said, I don't want another nail driven. I don't want another actor hired. I don't want any lights bought. I don't want any... And I went on and on and on. I wasn't paying any attention to Lucien. He was part Indian, and I hadn't seen how mad he was getting. So I gave a 10-minute tirade about what a director does. They got their feet off my desk. The assistant director stood up, and I had him pretty well licked. And I turned to this beautiful man, and I said, excuse me, Mr. Ballard, for this tirade. I'm sorry you're involved in this. I am so proud to have you as my cameraman. But because of my background, when we get in the bull ring, I have a very definite idea where we should put my camera. He said, Mr. Boetticher, I don't care if you put your camera up your ass. So I said, would you like to go across the street and have a beer? And he said, yes, I would. And we were together ever since. But he was something very, very special.
All right, folks. Yeah, one more? Yeah.
No, I did the first 3 Mavericks. I did What They Said Saved Hong Kong. What They Said Saved the Rifleman. I really didn't want to do television. It's not, it may be now, but it wasn't a director's medium then, you know. You go in and make the Maverick picture in 8 or 10 days, and the next poor guy that comes in does it in 6, and, you know, it wasn't for me. But I think you'll like the Mavericks. I haven't seen them for years, but I think what we did was very good. I do have one more quick story which you'll appreciate about Lucien and about direction. I wanted to make a shot that you saw way up in the hills, and Lucien was going to photograph this. He didn't end up doing it. So I got in a helicopter, and I wanted to show how infinitesimal a cowboy was in the 1880s. I mean, you're lucky if you just get across the plains without the Indian. It's just getting there and living. So I wanted to see him. You could hardly see him, and then he got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. So I got up on the helicopter, and I found the mountain that I wanted to climb. So Lucian was like I am. We got up at 4 o'clock in the morning, freezing, and we rode out in the stretch out. And we got on 2 pack mules, and we rode till the pack mules gave out. And we got out, and we climbed, and we climbed, and we climbed. And we got up to the top of this mountain. And I looked over, and I could see the sun was going to come up here. You could just see a little bit of gray. And I said, Luge, right here tomorrow morning at 6:15, 25 lens. He said, wait a minute. He walked over about 10 feet, and he dug, and there was a stake in the ground. And he said, come over here and see what you like. Raoul Walsh and I made this same shot 10 years ago. I said, mine. The hell with Raoul Walsh. But that was Luge.
That's great. Bud, thank you so much. We're going to wrap up tonight.
Thank
Bud
you.
will be with us through the weekend, and we hope to see you again.
On Orson Welles. Please join me in welcoming the moderator for this afternoon's discussion, a critic for the Cahiers du Cinéma and a filmmaker in his own right. You probably know him as one of the co-directors of the recent documentary on Orson Welles' It's All True, Mr. Bill Crone. And now, please join me in welcoming our weekend's honoree and the director of Arusa, Mr. Budd Boetticher. Do you want to introduce Roddy, or do you want me to?
I will. Okay. We've had a long couple of days. You know, I've never bothered before to tell anybody why I made this picture. I've read many romantic ideas of why. One, that I was obsessed with bullfighting, which I'm certainly not. Two, that Rosa was my hero, which was absurd. As a matter of fact, the only hero I ever had in my life was killed the year I was born. And strangely, it was Baron Manfred von Richthofen in the great German War I ace, and I had his picture over my bed until I went to Ohio State. I got it from his mother after about 15 requests, and that's the only one, maybe because he was dead, that I thought, wow, this is really something special. But the reason I make it the truth was that I'd worked so hard to establish some kind of a career, and all the young men I'd started and helped had become stars. And I don't go to Hollywood parties, and I didn't do all the things that everybody told me you should do. I was just having a hell of a good time myself. And nothing was happening with me. So I thought, I can make a picture that nobody else in the world can make. I don't think there'll be another time ever when one of your best friends is the greatest bullfighter in the world, and you really knew what you were talking about because that's what you'd done yourself. And everybody said, you're crazy. And until you read the book, you'll never know what I went through, and everybody thought I was crazy. But the end of the story is a very beautiful one in one quick sentence. Because I was gone all those 7 years, and because I had all that hell, I was able to wait for my wife to grow up enough so that 21 years ago I met her. And the last 21 years of my life have been the greatest ever, ever, ever. I'd like to introduce my wife, Mary Boetticher. Bill, I understand before we start the question and answer thing that a very dear friend of mine has arrived. And this young gentleman I don't see enough of, and I mean I'd like to every day. Roddy Mcdowall, a great, great actor.
Well, hello.
Hello. How are you?
I'm fine. That brought back a lot of memories. I was going to be a torero, see, because of him.
Really?
I still have the capote.
Really?
Sure, I do.
Are you any good?
I never was any good. I just what I remember meeting Amanita with you. Yes, and 2 or 3 others. I know. This is fascinating. This is just fascinating.
It's what I wanted to do, and once in a while you make a picture. And don't forget, in those days, bullfighting was very glamorous with Ava Gardner and Lana Turner and Luis Miguel Dominguin and Arusa. It isn't fashionable now, and I never try to sell it. But in those days, it was very, very special.
How has it changed? I mean,
well, we've got, and I think they have a right, as long as they stay in our own country, they have a right to criticize it here. It's something that you can't explain, and it's medieval, and there are a lot of things about medieval art that's very interesting and very romantic. A lot changed. Look at our world.
What happened to his children?
Carlos is a great rejoneador.
Oh, really?
Carlitos. Manolo is one of the greatest bullfighters in the world.
Oh, really?
And the girl, who's now been married 4 times because she's never found anybody who can control her, she was the best one of the bunch, the little one with the earring.
Yeah.
So they're great.
Is his wife still alive?
Yes, his wife is still alive, very much alive, and very beautiful. And she's a Spanish marquesa, and the class is very special with her. And we saw them last year in Sevilla, and Carlos will work in the next picture with me.
Really?
Yeah.
Will I?
Of course.
Oh, now you remember that. Right. We made 2 films together, Bud and myself, and one in 1949, that was Black Midnight.
Yeah.
And the other one, what was it?
Killer Shark.
Killer Shark. We made movies to remember.
Well, Roddy was 21 when we were going to make Killer Shark, and his mother and father had been very supportive. And matter of fact, kind of in the way, weren't they, all those years?
In a sense.
In a sense,
it's understandable. Yeah.
So Roddy wanted to get out on his own, so we arranged to take over the Jack Dempsey Hotel in Escondido, in Sonata. And we got all of our friends there, and they were all beautiful, and they were all cute, and everybody made a couple of bucks. And you became 22 pretty quickly, didn't you?
Yes, I did. Black Midnight. We were up at Lone Pine, were we? Yeah, that was. I remember that one very, very well. Maybe because I took a lot of photographs on that. I was starting to take snapshots then, and I took pictures during the making.
Well, that's when you became one of the best. What Roddy doesn't know is I have the screenplay from the book all ready to go for the 3rd picture, and you know you're in that.
I'm happy. I had a wonderful time with you. Wonderful, wonderful time.
You want to go to a question?
Well, I'd like to just ask what he was like in those days. Do you recall your first
Roddy?
meeting? No, you.
The
subject of our gathering here.
He was wonderful. He was like a great big kid, but very shrewd, and really knew what he was doing. Remember, we were working on those 2 films for a man called Lindsley Parsons, and these films you made, they were for Monogram. You made them in like 14, 15 days, 12 days, and then went to a hospital for another week or so. Their schedules were absolutely frightening. And Lindsley, it's not against him. Art he didn't want. He just wanted it tomorrow, or yesterday, actually. And so there's a sense there was always sort of a pull about, we wanted more than the traffic would allow. But it was a wonderful experience.
We got more.
Yes, we did. I've never seen, those films since.
No, we probably never will. But
I have a tape of Killer Shark.
You
if
do,
want to borrow
but
it.
you have Black Midnight.
No, I didn't even know
It's a
about
lost
that one.
film.
one of the great things on Killer Shark, which I'll never forget, we had a wonderful gangster type guy named Doug Fowley, who became one of the great character actors in pictures. And we were 12 miles out on a tuna boat in the picture. And Doug was so attractive, none of us had any idea, his being a young man, that he had all false teeth. And the first day shooting, he got seasick and threw up his teeth. So he made $10 million for the next part of the year playing, and he never put his teeth back in.
Oh, yeah. How many cameras did you have on this film?
Oh, God, we had 10 in all the bullfights.
Wonderful.
10 cameras. Anyway, there's one thing that I wanted to tell you, which I think will be humorous to you because it's first-hand information. You always hear somebody told me so-and-so, but this happened with me, and it's one of my favorite stories. Carlos called me in 1955 and asked me if I would fight with him and Silverio for the poor children in Tijuana. And I'd been drinking at the time. It was very early on Sunday morning. And my ex-wife was sitting on the foot of the bed when I woke up. And she said, guess what we're going to do in 6 weeks? I said, what do you mean we? She said, you're going to fight with your friend Carlos Aruza in Tijuana for the benefit of the poor children. I said, I am. So we negotiated not the 4 weeks that he wanted from now, but 6 weeks. So I was making a picture called Wings of the Hawk, and Abby Lane was one of my leading ladies. And as you know, probably her husband was Xavier Cugat. So my only request was that I get the room that they'd built for Manolete in the Caesar Hotel, which was a big, big suite, and nobody takes any money. We did. We made $35,000 for the poor kids. But I had absolutely no fear for the first time in my life because I was a motion picture director. I hadn't killed a bull in 16 years. And, you know, it's like during the war, if you're a Marine, you don't think they're going to kill you because everybody's mad at the Army. So I was getting dressed, and Xavier Cugat's orchestra was there playing, and the place was a madhouse. And Carlos, who was the cheapest guy in the world, had a single room way down the hall, and there was a knock on the door, and here's Charlie Aruza, and he's got his bullfight suit like he wore on horseback, which you do in festivals. And he said, Bud, can I come in and dress with you? Well, I introduced him to Elroy Hurst, the great football player at the Rams, who was bandaging my ankles, and the party was going on in the other room. And it was kind of an early wake for me, but I didn't understand this. So we went into the bathroom, and it had his and hers mirrors, and Carlos and I went in to finish our dressing. So hold this a second, Bill. So I had my mirror here, and in these costumes you don't have any tie like you do in the gold suits. You have two little gold clips or diamond clips here. So I had never seen anybody except my drunken friends shake. I had never shaken myself. And I'm completely calm because the bulls aren't going to kill me. As I said, I'm a director. So I reached up like this to try to fix my collars, and my hands were shaking, and I was a little embarrassed about it. I didn't want to look at Aruza, so I tried again, and I couldn't do it. And without looking away from my mirror in a big close-up, I said, Charlie, can you fix these things for me? And his hands came in the mirror, and he said, with what? I said, what the hell am I doing here? So, do you have any questions to ask about this picture? Because we're going to see a lot of each other, I think, tonight.
I just want to make one comment on the subject of lost films. What is the state of the negative of this film? This was obviously not a new print today.
Well, this is 16 millimeter.
Yeah.
John Sturgis put up the last $200 for the picture, and figured that he had it under control. So he said, you say, I told some of you this before, whenever they tell you, sweetheart, I'm going to win you an Academy Award, don't believe them. So I was in Mexico City, and he said, let me cut your picture and change your narration. I'll fix it for you. So I came up here, and the wonderful drunken music that is in Mexico, if you know the country at the bullfights, was now the Metro Philharmonic Orchestra. And the narration was terrible. It was a mess. So I said, we're not going to use this. And they put it away in a vault. So when De Laurentiis got the picture a couple of years ago, the picture had only been seen by one person in the world, me, and I said, this is not it. It was Jason Robards' narration. It was 20 minutes longer, and I'd cut 15 or 20 minutes out of this today. And they put out John's version. because it was the only good version they had left. It had never been shown. So they made tapes, and that is now out, and we're suing De Laurentiis, and I hate suits. I think it can be settled. But the attorney for De Laurentiis said to Mr. Gumpel, the head of the Directors Guild, and my attorney, she said, Mr. Boetticher, I don't understand what you think we've done to you. And I said, well, let me put it in a different way. If De Laurentiis had just bought the Mona Lisa from the Louvre, and when you uncrated the painting, it was a painting of the Ugly Sister. That's what you've done to me. So that's where it is right now, and don't buy the one that's out. What? Yeah, this is my, yeah. And we'll get it back. Anything else? Yes?
Do you entertain the idea in the future of making another bullfight picture?
No, I don't think so. Bullfighting is completely out of style, as I said. That doesn't mean anything to me. But there have been bullfight pictures, and some very good ones from Spain, but there's never been a bullfight picture unless you consider Cordovez made one, Learning to Die, which was quite good, but he played an actor. And I wanted this completely real. That's why I made it a drama. I didn't want somebody doubling Bob Stack, somebody doubling Tony Quinn, somebody doubling Gilbert Roland. And, of course, you know here, this is for real. The horses are real, the ruse is real. And I don't think it can be done any better. And the reason I don't is Carlos hated my guts by the end of the picture. But I'll tell you a wonderful thing. We saw the last, just before he was killed, we called the last sequence Plaza Mexico. And I always called him Charlie, and he called me Bud, and we really cared about each other since we were kids. But we weren't speaking. So I called him at home when I had the last sequence cut. And that's 2 bulls there. And I made him wear the same costumes, and it was he really hated me. So I called him and I said, Carlos, would you like to see Plaza Mexico? And he said, where? And I said, Churubusco Studios. And he said, what time? I said, 12 o'clock. He said, who's going to be there? I said, just you and me, mano a mano, hand to hand. So I walked in and sat down at the controls, and Arusa walked in, didn't speak to me, and came way up in the front. We have this big projection room, and we turned on the film. And he sat there furious at me. You could see the steam that he was going to see his story. But he didn't know what lenses I had on, and he didn't know where all the cameras were. And it was all cut together, just like you saw it. And pretty soon I heard, Ole, Ole. And he would begin sitting up like this, and he began really yelling, Ole, ay, cuidado, Carlos. He would say, be careful, Carlos. Bueno, bueno. So the lights went on, and I sat back there, and God, I'd been waiting for this. So I said, so? He said, hijo de la chingado, that's better than I am. I said, so, and he said, gracias, and we gave each other a hug, and
just to be clear, it is cut together out of 2 different bullfights. And after having waited how long to get him back into the Plaza de Mexico?
13 years.
13 years. When he finally did it and he was done, what did you say to him to get him to go back another time the next Sunday?
Well, I told him he had to do it. I was his director. Yeah.
I heard a story, and maybe you can confirm it, that Carlos Arusa was the one who led Santana's troops to the Alamo.
Yes, he was. It was great because I had him under contract, and I had to give the Duke permission to use Arusa. So I was there when, he's the one that was on his bullfight horse doing the piaffe, and he reads the proclamation and they shoot the cannon over his head. Yeah, he was something. No, that was Carlos. Anything else? Well, don't go away because we've really got some good pictures coming up. Thank you.
Let me just say that if you want to know the story of the making of Arusa, which is much too complicated and fascinating a story to tell up here, there's a book on sale outside. And I would just like to ask Mr. Boetticher one question. This is a story about somebody who goes to Mexico to make a picture and comes back, I don't know how many years later, having been in a federal penitentiary, having been committed, I believe, to an insane asylum by at the instigation of his own business manager back in Hollywood. having nearly died of pneumonia and having lost his fortune, but determined to stay and finish it. And I just wonder why you've never made a picture about that. It's an incredible story.
Well, I said, Bill, and you know it, you've read the book. We have the screenplay on the book now. I called that fellow, that guy. I don't know how we lived through it, but now we have to find the actor to do it. He has to be in his 40s, had certain success, be physically able to take care of himself. In the penitentiary in Mexico City, Mexico is a great country. I was in prison on the 27th day of a 90-day unlimited credit at the Hilton Hotel. You're guilty in Mexico till you're proven innocent. And 7 of the greatest days I've ever spent in my life. Some of the people I met you'll read about. You can't believe these guys. But there will be a picture. We just have to find the right fellow to play it, yes.
Horse for Mr. Barnum, is that the right title?
A Horse, Mr. Barnum, yeah. We hope to be shooting the last week in August. And if this isn't the best picture I've ever made in my life, then I'm really wrong, because in Spain, yes. We have James Coburn playing tango, and he'll be wonderful. The older cowboy who's lying, he says he's 50 and he's in his 60s. Bruce Boxleitner, who's never really had a break. A young man back there who's been my protege since he was 12 years old is going to play Leland. Josh Santa, and he's going to be beautiful, his first picture. And you have to be a great horseman to be in this picture, or you're not going to get in. Assumpta Serna, who is the most dynamic woman I have ever seen on the screen, is my leading lady. And I think Armand DeSanti to play the Gypsy King. We have what we call a team. We don't put $15 million in one actor and nobody else gets paid. This will be a great group of people, and I'm very happy about it.
Okay, thank you, and thank you for coming.
Thank you so much.